meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. There are entire industries dedicated to providing aftermarket parts and accessories to car owners that want to personalize their vehicles. Whether you want to modify the mechanics, dress it up cosmetically, or add new features of functionality, there's probably something on Amazon or your local car parts store to accommodate your needs. Yet, these needs are as old as cars. And so how did people in the early days of the automobile pimp their vintage rides? In the late 19th century, if you owned a car, you most likely either hired a mechanic or a chauffeur to care for it, or you did it yourself. There were not many garages staffed with mechanics available for repairs, much less modifications. And if you wanted to make changes to your newfangled automobile to make it more closely suit your fancy, most of such modifications were up to you or your mechanic. There were no parts stores and precious few garages with mechanics on staff qualified to do such work available. But there were other vehicles on the roads. Carriages, horse-drawn, open-top passenger vehicles were commonly owned by more well-to-do persons and families. Coaches, personal horse-drawn passenger vehicles, but with enclosed bodies, were status symbols of the absurdly rich. And for both the wealthy and common man, bicycles were quite popular in the latter half of the 19th century. All of these vehicles had been around much longer than cars, and modifications were available for these vehicles. And so many early car owners turned to such products. An early modification for your 19th century car was borrowed from the coach and carriage market, the heater. It wouldn't be until the 20th century that cars would be made with heaters taking their warmth from the engine and giving it to the grateful and possibly freezing occupants. Yet these carriage heaters were not forced air units with fans and such. They were basically a hollow metal footrest with a drawer in it to put hot coals into. It kept your feet warm in winter conditions and made the ride in an open-bodied automobile a bit more bearable. Now, carriage clocks had been around since Napoleonic times, and many car owners used them to add a bit of timeliness to their cars. These clocks were wound as opposed to having a pendulum-powered movement, and this was a good thing while traveling along bumpy roads. Also, these clocks were typically rather robustly built, giving them some protection against the weather and road conditions found on open carriages and, as it turns out, cars of the time. Bells and horns were commonly added to pre-20th century cars, whether they be bicycle or carriage-based products. Both industries had bulb horns available, and both were of the squeeze me like the mask did types, though the bike ones were typically smaller. By the way, no, the klaxon auga horns didn't get onto cars until 1908, and yes, they did get into the automotive aftermarket at the same time. Now, bells were either like those found on the handlebars of a bicycle or were small versions of ship bells, just without a clapper. A nearby striking hammer would be available when you wanted to ring your bell. If you were a 19th century car owner with more money than brains, there were a few other things you could have done to pimp your ride. Tuning an engine for performance was a very new science, with few engineers and mechanics capable of doing the job. But they could be had for a price. If a rich yet civilian driver wanted his car to have the speed, sound, and durability of a race-built car, he would go to the companies that built race-winning automobiles to do the appropriate mechanical adjustments and or modifications. Yet another good reason as a car builder to have a winning reputation. Brakes were an issue during this era. Much effort was put into engineering a car that could reliably go, but not nearly as much effort into how to make it stop. For those that owned light cars or cycle cars, spoon brakes, like those found on penny farthing bicycles, could often be added. Admittedly, this would require the addition of a new brake control, and operating spoons in tandem with whatever braking was to the rear wheels was tenuous at best, but it certainly was done back in the day. Upgrading the wheels was on the mind of some well-to-do owners. Many cars came from the factory with solid rubber tires, and upgrading them to pneumatic was something that could be done. This was far more popular in Europe, where the roads were more suitable for balloon tires, as they were often called. Yet even on that side of the pond, horseshoe nails were a hazard, and some wealthy car owners would have a mechanic to ride with them or nearby in another vehicle to repair or change the tire if the need arose. But these modifications could have been done to horse-drawn vehicles of the time as well as cars. In the first decade of the 20th century, a new automotive industry emerged, the aftermarket. Selling parts to repair cars and selling accessories to specifically fit all cars or even a specific car. Now, it is true that the various tire manufacturers, for example Dunlop, Michelin, and Continental, had been doing this since the early 1890s, but they began from the cycle and carriage industries. So let's look at the aftermarket that didn't exist prior to cars. We'll start with speedometers. Yes, locomotives and such did sometimes have them, but were part of the original equipment and not aftermarket. In 1904, a new company, Stewart Warner, offered speedometers that could be fitted to most cars of the time after they left the factory, as well as before. Adding the Speedo-Odo combo unit to your car was all the rage for car owners and manufacturers alike. Stewart Warner gauges soon became standard on many, if not most, makes of cars. Clocks also became popular. Not the carriage kind, but rather clocks that would fit into the dashboard. The Waltham Watch Company was particularly prominent in this market, producing over half of the clocks found in American cars from 1910 through to the Second World War, as well as many other customers in Europe. These clocks typically had an 8-day escapement, so as long as you wound it once a week, you were good to go and be on time. Many cars with open bodies often came with a canvas or leather top that could be unfolded to cover the occupants in very rainy or perhaps very sunny weather. But not all of them did, and so you could take your car to a carriage company and have one installed. In some cases, they would also be foldable, but they also would, at the customer's request, make a permanent top for the car, making it something like a Surrey with the fringe on top. Body modifications were, at this point, rarely done. But they were done, usually by the owner or, in case of someone with absurd wealth, by a professional coach builder. One of the earliest examples of a coach-built modified car is this one. A wealthy Scotsman living in Calcutta, Robert Mathewson, purchased a 1910 Brook. A car maker in Suffolk, England, took it back to India and had local craftsmen put this body on it. Mind you, smoke from the exhaust gases would come out the swan's beak while in operation. It was scary stuff and was actually meant to impress and scare the local people. Yeah, vintage rides don't get much more pimped out than this. But it was the Model T that really got the automotive aftermarket going. There were two primary ways to modify your T: modifications provided by the dealer and those you could do yourself with off-the-shelf or catalog products. Let's look at the dealer mods first. When you went to your pre-World War I Ford dealer, you could get your T with various different bodies and paint from the factory. But many dealerships offered other modifications that they could perform in their own garages on site before you took delivery of the car. Two such mods were quite common. First is the Ruxtall axle. A stock Model T had 2 forward gears and a reverse, and was good for 40 miles an hour-ish. The Ruxtall was basically a transaxle modification that added 2 more gears to the car through the differential. These could be controlled by the driver from a shift lever added to the controls to bring these gears into play. making the car basically 4 forward speeds and 2 reverse. Note that they didn't make the car faster. The Ruxtall low gear combined with the factory low would top out at about 3 miles an hour. Where this modification really saw its merit was on the hills of any road that was fairly steep. The gearing between low and high was quite distant from the factory, and if the car bogged down in high gear, you'd have to go low, and so you'll take the hill at about 5 miles an hour. The Ruxtall high gear was between the factory ones, so you can engage the Ruxtall and manage a hill at some 15 or even up to 20 miles an hour-ish. A far cry better than a brisk walking speed. The other very popular dealer upgrade was to the braking. As mentioned earlier, making a car stop was often neglected, and 2 methods were on the offing from a dealer and also as aftermarket: AC braking or Rocky Mountain braking. The AC type works specifically with the emergency brake to add additional force to the brake drums at the rear wheels. Now keep in mind that today's drivers only use their emergency brake when parked, if they use it at all. But in pre-World War I motoring, the emergency brake was a real thing. The regular brakes were good at gradually slowing down the car, but actually stopping it, that's what the emergency brake was for. The Rocky Mountain braking system did things a bit differently. Now before I continue, this name has nothing to do with Colorado. The company that actually made these products was named Rocky Mountain Steel Products Incorporated, and they were located in Los Angeles, California. Anywho, these assemblies could be attached rather easily to the factory brakes and would be actuated by either the brake pedal, the emergency brake, or both, even at once if desired. Both braking upgrades were quite popular. And Ford was not alone regarding dealer upgrades. By 1915, the top 3 automakers in the U.S. by raw production, Ford, Willys, and Studebaker respectively, all had their offings for upgrades at their dealerships, and other makers were getting on board as well. And at the same time, the true aftermarket Pimp My Ride industry was birthed. True, it would be after World War I in the roaring 20s that this industry would truly flourish, but the USA did not enter the war until 1917, and even then the US auto industry did not stop making cars, unlike Europe, where car manufacture pretty much ceased in 1914 and was put on pause for 5 years. America was making automobiles like hotcakes, and Americans wanted to personalize their cars. One way was to modify the look of the car with accessories. Now, to be clear, seeing a car from this era that was hot-rodded, complete with bodywork like Frenching lights and such, was just not done until after World War II. In the day, you either added to the existing body or removed parts of it for aesthetic reasons, and such accessories could be functional or just because you liked the look of it. One popular functional addition was the motometer. This replaced the existing radiator cap with one that had a thermometer in it. So if the engine water got too hot and the whole thing was gonna blow, the motometer would show you this impending danger with the mercury rising to the "you better do something soon" level. It's kind of like having Scotty on the hood of your car shouting, "She can't take it anymore, Captain!" At roughly the same time, car mascots or hood ornaments also became popular, especially after Rolls-Royce presented the Spirit of Ecstasy in 1909. It wasn't long until the aftermarket supplied just about anything you'd want and definitely didn't need to adorn the radiator, which was against the dash if you were French. Swans, policemen, frogs, naked ladies, angels, devils, dogs, cats. The list was just about endless. Bolting more lights, bells, and horns was always trendy. And for those cars not originally equipped, fitted luggage complete with racks could be had from various coach builders, though at a premium price. Side mirrors to be attached to the hood, spare tires via straps, or even inside the car for the driver's convenience was also not always standard on a car and were purchased often by safety-minded car owners. But let's not forget the interior of the car. Shades and curtains were often added to enclosed cars where they were not equipped, and of course, car-specific pillows for passengers. You could add a tray that would strap to one of the front seats and create a desk of sorts for the rear passengers. Imagine being able to sit in the back seat of a 1915 Willys and dropping down a tray for your iPad. That's technological advancement. Under the hood modifications began to grow in availability during pre-World War I USA. The ubiquitous T-head engine could be tuned and be given more significant changes to make it produce more power. The concept of changing the cam, controlling the valves, changing the crankshaft to alter the stroke, and boring the engine for a larger combustion changer were all aftermarket options in 1915. Adding gears a la a Ruckstill was done, but so were entirely new transmissions by dozens of companies to maximize the additional horsepower of the now more powerful engine. Custom intake manifolds and dual-barrel carburetors came on the aftermarket during this period, as well as custom exhaust for those that liked their sound. After the Great War, the aftermarket exploded with products to make your car whatever you wanted it to be. Now, the ultimate in vintage automotive pimping would be the coach-built cars of the 1920s and 30s. Many high-end luxury car makers would sell you the car without a body on it, what was called a running chassis. Then you could take this chassis to a coach builder, Murphy, Brewster, Pininfarina, whoever you chose, and have them make the car of your dreams, as long as your pocketbook could support your vision. And these coach-built cars of the 20s and 30s are some of the most beautiful automobiles to have ever graced the roads of the world. Yet the world of hot rods didn't really begin with the Ford V8 flathead of 1932. Using the technology learned from military aircraft of the First War, things like supercharging, turbos, more efficient engine and oil cooling, and other subtle things that could be done to make an engine more powerful and efficient work their way into car owners that wanted to be completely and competitively fast. The magazines and catalogs of the 1920s would advertise the newest engine gadget to get that one more horsepower of your T-head engine. And of course, the Model T Ford itself could be, through the aftermarket, turned into all kinds of things. For example, if you needed it for a winter wonderland, you could purchase a kit that would add another axle behind the rear tires, make the now tandem rear into a tank tread, strap some skis to the front wheels, and presto, a snowmobile. A kit was available to make a Model T into a farm tractor. If you needed a mobile engine to run other farm machinery, quite a few kits could be had to make your Model T do the job of powering your thresher, your sawmill, your water pump, whatever needed power. This was just a short look at the birth of the automotive aftermarket. There's a lot more here, and it's a fascinating study. But one thing is for certain. As long as people have owned cars, they've sought ways to make them uniquely their own, to find ways to express themselves by what they drive. So when you see a car on the road today that has gone completely bling, loud and fast, or just covered with stickers, know that over 100 years ago, folks were doing the same thing, pimping their vintage ride. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.